Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Just got some folks joining us as we speak, so we'll get going in just a moment. We've got just before the hour. Definitely a believer in starting on time, and we have a couple of quick housekeeping things to cover anyhow, so we'll get going in just a sec. Hey Ryan, maybe you could let me know in chat that you are seeing the presentation and hearing me chat. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Got confirmation that we've actually gone live. I've never had any problems with Zoom myself, but I know one person I work with was on a presentation. They were like 10 minutes into it before they realized that nobody could actually hear or see anything. So don't have to worry about that. With that said, let's jump right in and get underway. So yeah, so today we're going to do our presentation. Going to try and be fairly quick with it to leave lots of time for question and answer. It's always a lot of fun to hear sort of real world challenges and questions from people. So it'd be great to get through things and leave as much time as possible for that. During the presentation, if there are any questions that come up, feel free to ask them. And if they're quick things, we'll address them right away. If not, we'll just add them to the list for some questions for afterwards. Yeah, and maybe just a little bit about myself before we jump in. Sort of got an interesting background in tourism. Way back in the 90s, I actually was doing desktop publishing, as it was called then, which is basically doing graphics production and pre-press and setting up publications and that sort of thing. And it was suggested to me that I join Tourism Victoria, and which is our local destination marketing organization. I actually did join way back then and actually got in sort of really tight with that organization and more or less became their in-house graphics resource. And then during that period, I went on to open a digital print shop, which definitely not the best time to get into the print industry, but nonetheless, I learned a ton in that industry, and we did a lot of work setting up brochures and rack cards and doing materials. Actually, it's funny, I started dabbling in websites back then, but didn't carry through, which probably would have been a better path. But long story short, got out of the print industry in 2001 and into digital marketing, which seemed like the sort of emerging space where the skill sets I picked up in the other area of work. And yeah, long story short, we've been in our business now, plus ROI online marketing, since 2007. Just had our 14th anniversary, as I found out when I was alerted by a bunch of congratulations in LinkedIn. And we serve, or actually I should say served, just the pandemic has had a real impact on our tourism business, but we do serve clients across the US, Canada, and the Caribbean, and hoping to see that bounce back shortly. And that's part of the reason of doing this sort of this webinar to help sort of get back into that area and actually share some insights with people that can actually help for those of you that are still working on some of your own stuff as well. And essentially we've been doing those clients, doing a ton of advertising, and have even done, I personally led 2 successful SEO audits for one of Canada's largest destination marketing organizations that drove, we basically found traffic that they were missing out on 2 years in a row and nicely boosted their traffic numbers. And the big thing about kind of going from that print era to this current era is it's just so refreshing. And I just so much love being in an industry now where you can measure everything. To be honest, I used to be, even when I was in the print industry, was kind of negative on the whole marketing field. Kind of didn't buy into a lot of what was being sort of shared and going on in that field. And digital is a totally different place, and it's basically what has led us to becoming a very performance-driven area, just that everything is measurable now. So just a really refreshing change. And with that said, let's get into the meat of things. So in terms of the business types that this presentation is for, these lessons apply to everyone, but we're mostly looking at owner-operated size properties, and this is relevant to accommodations, hospitality, and all sorts of other things like rentals, or basically anything where folks are coming from out of your market to visit. And a big lesson too is that if you're nimble and creative, some of the absolute best opportunities come from doing what the giant companies aren't doing. In some cases, they choose not to. In other cases, they're just not nimble enough to do some of these things. Kind of interesting, actually. We're thinking of lighting up our September webinar with a theme of beating Goliath in terms of how smaller organizations can take on large competitors and succeed. So stay tuned for that if that sounds interesting. So looking at the visitor types, and it is really important to break these down just because they exhibit totally different online behaviors during these periods. And so first off, there's sort of national and international visitors, and these folks do significant research in advance. Getting offers and ads in front of the general market before they've decided on a destination or before they've gotten into it is often quite pointless, at least until they're researching your destination. This is something that large brands and global hotel chains, for instance, they can advertise to everyone because they have properties in most cities. But if you have sort of a property in a location, you absolutely want to make sure that people are in the research process before you're spending money to get in front of them. Because of course, folks generally make decisions in the order of first destination, then they pick sort of their travel and accommodation options, and then third come activities. And this is particularly, again, relevant to attractions and hospitality in terms of when you start marketing to these folks, because you want them to have probably the first two nailed down before you get into that. And then there's also typically significant local and regional opportunities. And that's something that we certainly saw with some of our clients last year when state and provincial borders were getting locked down, is that there is a lot of potential business typically within driving distance of your destination, or sometimes short hop flights. And the other thing about local and regional audiences and visitors is that those folk are usually able to respond to offers and promotions. So for instance, if we're here in Victoria, British Columbia, it is viable that if somebody had a special weekend offer in the fall, that they could attract people from Vancouver. So that's sort of where there's an exception where an offer can drive behavior for the local and regional folks. Whereas with national and international visitors, you could put just about any kind of offer in front of them, but unless they're planning on your destination, it's just not going to do you any good. And of course, we want to, when we're doing advertising, typically want to separate our budgets and campaigns for those two different visitor types because they do exhibit different behaviors. So looking at the local sort of stages are fairly straightforward. The national and international, of course, this is usually done way in advance. And this is where when people are starting to research destinations, this is where accommodations really need to get front and center. And search marketing is usually the best way to get in front of these folk. And through search engine optimization, if you can, and search ads, usually the top ways. You'll find we're kind of biased towards the search advertising. Just it's something we specialize in quite a bit, but it is the area where people are exhibiting their intent. They're actually searching for exactly what you're offering. And if you know how to interpret the language of what sort of keywords or rather search terms they're typing in, you can do very well with it. Attractions, it's kind of, if possible, it's great to build awareness during this stage, but a lot of visitors don't book until they're much nearer to their travel time or even at their destination. So this is where, if possible, search engine optimization is great for sort of attractions and hospitality during this time. Although in some competitive markets, that's not necessarily going to be possible because sort of just not viable without a massive investment. Or search ads that are targeting only people with very high intent. And again, that's something we'll touch on a little bit, but we can determine the intent of the searchers through the keywords they're using. And of course, some folks plan every single detail really early, but this is typically not most people that do that. So during folks' visits, some great opportunities there. We'll look in some targeting opportunities in a moment. At that time, of course, accommodations are generally chosen before now. Although that said, there's still some room for some local search advertising for high intent folks. I mean, people do move from one property to another. Sometimes people do arrive without having accommodations. I know in our family, I don't think we have ever traveled that way, or probably would. We kind of like to know what we're getting into, but there are people that do that. This, however, is just a ridiculously critical time for sort of attractions and hospitality businesses. And smart marketers can reap really big rewards by getting good at reaching visitors during this time. And in this time, search advertising, social advertising, and display advertising can all play a huge part. Again, SEO is always kind of there in the background, the search engine optimization, although it's, again, not a real topic that we're going to get into today. It gets a bit deep. So a quick moment about analytics and attribution. You can see there's a big mess of data on my screen. These are screenshots out of an actual Google Analytics account. And one thing that we really advocate in our organization is tagging all the promotion that you're doing. And there's something called UTM links, which is essentially, it's not the link itself, it's just the structure. There's a little bit of information that you can add to the end of any links that you're distributing through advertising. And then when somebody clicks on them, Google Analytics understands exactly where they come from. So you can see in the screenshot there, there's showing direct traffic, Google cost per click, there's Google organic traffic, there's some traffic through this deal spotter. There's the Google product sync, which interestingly is the feed that comes out of the Google Merchant Center and Google My Business. And Google made some of that traffic free last year. So there are some huge opportunities there. And that also involves, we'll touch on the Google Hotels advertising a bit later. In that example, oh, folks are getting Bing organic searches. And again, by using these tags, you can see exactly how, and in this example, over on the right, you can see this is sorted by revenue for this year, about which of these different channels drove how much revenue. Over in the middle there, there's that source and medium column. And in that example, it's actually sorted by users. And something that's interesting in this case, for instance, this company's used social media and social advertising really strategically for awareness. Although you can see there's like Facebook referral, that's from posts, Instagram referral, that's from posts, Facebook CPC, that's the paid ads. They've got almost 700 YouTube visitors from YouTube. None of those traffic sources are actually in the revenue, in the top 10 revenue areas. So that's something that you wouldn't know. And that's the level most folks look at. Oh, we got so X amount of traffic from one source. We got so much traffic from a different source, but they don't actually look at it by revenue unless they take that step. And then the other step, and Ryan from our team is on the call, and maybe he'll kill me for mentioning this because it can be a pain, and he's suffered through it in lots of cases, but it absolutely is worth the challenge of getting your booking engine set up for e-commerce analytics. And depending on the business, it might be a reservation system, whatever you're using to take the final information and do a transaction online, you absolutely need to get that integrated with your Google e-commerce analytics. And on some of the more progressive platforms, it's basically just flipping a switch. On some of the, and there's a name coming to mind, but I'm not going to say it out loud, in other reservation systems, it can be sort of a multi-week back and forth with their tech team to get it working, which is kind of ridiculous because anything that's taking bookings online now should integrate properly with Google Analytics as the most used platform on the planet. And then interestingly, the other thing over on the right at the bottom there, you can see there's, you can actually change the model by which you're looking at this attribution and how the revenue and goals are allocated. So by default, Google Analytics uses a last interaction attribution. And all that means is that whatever the way that somebody comes to your website on their last visit when they make that booking, that's the source that gets the credit for it. However, I know for actually literally just yesterday, got a new national client who virtually never has revenue from from the first visit, but is basically, they just launched and they're doing most of their work through Google Ads. And we actually, at their request, changed it so that in their case, they use a first interaction attribution model. And what that means in their case is now any money that comes in, Google Analytics looks and says, well, what was the first source of the traffic? And in that example, typical too with accommodation or attractions bookings is somebody might see your ad, click on the ad, come to your site, check it out, and then go and check in with their spouse or whoever before going back and booking. And maybe when they go back, they've bookmarked the link, in which case or send it through an email, in which case it'll show up in that direct column, or they might just type in the name of the hotel and go back, and that will show up as Google Organic, when actually it was the ad in that case that drove the awareness that allowed that interaction to happen. Kind of funny because we're just actually booking a trip out to Nova Scotia for next month to see my daughter. And I think literally, if I count them all up, I think probably 5 different electronic devices would have been used in researching before booking a hotel. So again, it does get a bit challenging tracking some of this stuff, but it's absolutely super valuable and important to do it. So just a quick note too around experimentation, trial and error, and with your tracking in place, there's really no excuse to avoid experimenting. In large companies that I've worked for and worked in, we'll try and always test something. So anything that launches will have multiple variations of it so that we can see sort of which way works the best. With a smaller organization, it's not always possible to set up, you don't always even have enough traffic to get statistically significant results from a test, but you can do lots of little experiments. And then tracking it, you get to see what's working, what's not. It is really important to note that basically nobody gets it right the first time. What you really want to do with your digital efforts is launch something modest, see if it looks like it has potential, and then refine it. I mean, sometimes we're lucky and it comes out and it's profitable the first time, high fives all around, and everybody's happy. That would maybe be 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 tests, or experiments. So this is where it's really important to mitigate your risks by doing fairly small experiments when you start. And this is something, I mean, in our company, I'm the fellow that sort of usually engages with new clients, and the team takes over, but I'm also the fellow that typically they contact if things don't go well, which fortunately doesn't happen too often. So we've become really, really strategic on figuring out like, well, what is the smallest size test that somebody can actually run in order to try something out and see if it works or not. And I guess compared to the old days of marketing, you know, unlike the old days where a company might be like, think in terms of, okay, we're going to launch this $10,000 promotion and we're going to go big and have this concept. This concept's awesome. And they'll go and invest sort of $10,000 in some sort of international advertising promotion or whatever. Nowadays, we would never, ever suggest that for a client unless we'd already done the same promotion for them and it had worked out. What we would do instead would be like, okay, well, let's test with that. If you have a $10,000 budget, let's test maybe 5 $400 experiments, identify the couple that work the best, and then spend the remaining budget on what's working the best. Again, and a big thing about it really is just, I know personally, from personal experience, ego can get in the way. You want to be right. Historically, companies think in terms of, oh, that worked or that didn't work. You really do have to think of it from an experimentation and trial and error standpoint. And I don't want to say you want to celebrate the ones that don't work, because we want everything to work, but the things that you try out that don't work perfectly, that's just part of it. That's just another learning experience that you chalk up and improve from. So probably gone on a bit too long about that. But with that said, in no particular order, that some of the channels and tactics that we look at are like email marketing, contests, social engagement, SEO, and then all the Facebook and Google stuff. We'll just dive in and have a quick look at a couple of those. Sort of focus more on targeting, but definitely I think with what we're discussing, it's great to look at some of these and see where they fit. So email marketing, interestingly, I started my career in email marketing, inheriting a mailing list of 1 million people that had never been marketed to in the software company that I got into. So that was quite the learning experience, let me tell you. Bottom line though is it can be ridiculously powerful for your local market and your short hop promotions. Because again, as I mentioned before, these are folks that if you put something in front of them, possibly in the off season or the shoulder season, but if you put something in front of them that's really attractive, they're in a position where they're close enough to take advantage of it. Where on the other end of things, it just really doesn't, email marketing typically doesn't have a role in reaching visitors that are far away. I mean, there are some exceptions, like, if there's cheap flights at the time and you decide to piggyback on a promotion that someone else is doing, like maybe there's some opportunities, but generally there isn't. Funny note that the screenshot that I have in there is, I visited the Palm Springs windmill tour like a couple of years ago, and they still send me emails, which kind of cracked me up because they're so irrelevant to anything that we'd possibly be considering at this point. But nonetheless, I guess I haven't unsubscribed yet, so maybe it's working on some level. Great attraction, by the way. The one thing about email marketing too that's really important is the strategy. I mean, the strategy is going to depend on your type of business, but the absolute most critical element is making sure that you create something that people want to open. A big mistake that people make in all industries is more or less, oh, I got this email address, we have this email list, let's just continually send offers to them. That will lead to a really high unsubscribe rate, and people won't be receptive when you do have something important to send them. So again, not enough time to get into it today, but definitely crafting something, especially if you're in a lifestyle-oriented business or a visually appealing sort of business, just crafting something that people will look forward to receiving, basically buys you the permission to keep marketing to them and sending your emails. Also, we're going to talk about contests in a second. They're a great way to build your subscriber base, again, with the caveat that there's no point in building your subscriber base in the first place unless you do have something that people will want to receive when you send to them. Oops, could have stepped ahead of myself. There we go. So contests in the sort of local and short hop market, especially, contests can be ridiculously effective for building awareness and building your mailing list. One thing that's cool about contests is that you can use your offering. So if you have say a bed and breakfast or a hotel or whatever it is, by using your offering as a prize, the contest more or less qualifies the entrants as being interested. Because if they weren't interested in your property, there'd be no point in entering in the first place. So it is nice on that front. lots of opportunities to gather some friendly other businesses that you collaborate with, and have like a big prize, a prize package that can lure somebody from a little further away to enter. One funny note is you actually don't want to make the prize necessarily too attractive. So for instance, if it might actually be more advantageous, for instance, not to include travel as a prize to your destination or your accommodation, because in that way you're only going to get entrants who would be willing to travel there. Because again, if something's all expensive paid, travel paid, all that sort of stuff, there's no barrier to entry. You could be getting entries from people who would just never be willing to make the investment to come to your location, versus again, having possibly not travel included is a good way of further qualifying folks. And one sort of hot tip is that Facebook and Instagram lead form ads, you need to structure them properly so that they are both fair to your entrants, and that they fully understand what they're signing up for. But there's also some privacy guidelines, particularly here in Canada, that you have to be careful to follow on. But basically, these lead form ads you can combine with a contest, and people can sign up for your contest, or in the case of a subscription, sign up for your subscription, which will automatically enter them in a contest. They can do that right in Facebook and Instagram in a matter of seconds without actually leaving the platform. So those are really effective, especially as compared to taking somebody off out of the social platform and onto a landing page somewhere and signing up. Facebook already has a bunch of their information, so they more or less just have to agree that they want to receive or that they want to enter, and boom, they sign up. And then a list is built of these people within the interface that you can download and put into MailChimp or whatever your email marketing platform is. Also, on the topic of contests, there are some fantastic opportunities for awareness building contests involving photography and social sharing and that sort of thing. Those are typically sort of longer term goals for building an audience. The contest is a bit more here and now, sort of direct results in terms of what you can do with it. And yeah, we've seen both those type of contests work just fantastic. In fact, we had one last summer in the local sort of regional market that drove signups on Facebook and Instagram for well under $1 a sign up by leveraging this contest for building the mailing list. And I remember when the first email went out, I was kind of really nervous about it, thinking like, oh my gosh, I hope these people are like wanting to, happy about getting the newsletter and like don't unsubscribe, because a flood of unsubscribes can really hurt your status with your email provider. Anyhow, their open rate actually didn't go down, and folks were engaged. And so yeah, to be definitely case in point that it is totally viable to do that. Another thing I'd say is don't be afraid to start with a smaller contest and do a bit of trial and error. The one real thing to keep in mind is, for instance, you want to think it through end to end. Like, you want to make sure it's not too hard to enter. A lot of companies shoot themselves in the foot by making it really hard to enter a contest, which is just the wrong way to go. And then looking to, okay, well, what would be any impediments to somebody wanting to participate? How are we going to fulfill on it? And then most importantly, what is the strategic purpose of this, and how are we going to leverage this contest sort of after the fact to boost our business? You really do have to think all those things through and think end to end. Facebook and Instagram engagement. So this is not an area that we'll touch on a whole lot right at the moment, but I mean, in general, it's interesting. Organic Facebook and Instagram engagement is typically best used to stay on the radar of locals and past visitors to your property. It's rare to see a strategy that can generate new bookings from folks you don't already have a relationship with. Now, interestingly, there are some exceptions to that. And there's a woman on our team who does a great job in terms of engaging through social media. But in terms of if you're looking for near-term bookings, sort of leaning a little more towards the advertising and paid end of things can move things along quicker. Instagram has great opportunities for organic engagement. So you can actually succeed on Instagram without spending any money. People do engage at a much higher level. And Facebook sort of doesn't distinguish so much between personal versus business accounts on there, at least from what I can see. Again, not that it's my total area of expertise or anything, that's for sure. With Facebook, however, you pretty much need to pay for any post you put out there if you want organic reach. They've kind of locked it down to a point where it's pretty much unrealistic to expect success with Facebook posts unless you do pay to boost them. Tons of other social properties out there. There's probably some fantastic opportunities to break through on some of the newer social properties. That said, yeah, again, just not my personal area of expertise, so I'm not going to jump into saying how to leverage TikTok or anything crazy like that. Search engine optimization, definitely too deep a topic for this webinar. That said, if you can see it through, it can be one of the highest ROI or one of the highest return on investment activities there is. That said, there are some challenges and hurdles to that. And really the most important thing if you're going to get into it is make sure up front, by doing a bunch of competitive research, make sure up front that you can actually win in it. Because you can improve over time, that's a given, but you need to understand how competitive your field is and whether it's realistic that you're going to break through onto the first page at some point. Because if not, and I give this accommodation example, except for some creative and niche opportunities for accommodations, it's usually fairly crowded and dominated by large national organizations. So in that case, you just, if you're a sort of locally owned hotel, you just don't want to jump into that competitive mix. I noticed there was just a question about contests, and we'll roll back around into that when we do the Q&A. Thanks for that. One interesting thing about search engine optimization is there often are great opportunities for attractions and niche offerings. So, and I'm thinking like if you're doing, say, mountain bike rentals or hiking tours or just about any kind of attraction, there's usually not 10 other people just like you competing. And if they are sort of locally owned, they're probably also not at the top of the SEO game either. So for attractions, niche offerings, even hospitality, there's a whole lot of wine tours and beer tours and opportunities around wineries and craft brewing, for example, that nobody's doing a great job optimizing for that stuff. So definitely some good opportunities there to learn a bit more about that and jump in. And that's, again, probably the best way of having a viable presence during that very early research stage without having to break the bank. Facebook and Instagram ads. So Facebook and Instagram, they actually share the same targeting engine and interface. Of course, Instagram is owned by Facebook. We're pretty practical. So in our company, when we do the Facebook and Instagram ads, we usually start with the same ads placed on both networks. And then once we see if they're behaving differently and how they're behaving differently, then we can do custom placements and do separate campaigns for the different platforms. Of course, you still want to make sure you have creative in your campaigns that will work nicely on both platforms, and that's gotten easier and easier over time. You can use these platforms to contribute during the research stage, but these really shine for folks during their trip. And we'll look at a couple of targeting examples right now. So These are just sample targets that I made up right in the Facebook interface. So in this example, we're here in Victoria, British Columbia. Let's assume that there was a wine festival and that we wanted to attract people from Seattle to come and stay at our property. So over on the left here are some of the things that you can target on the basis of. So let's pick, first off, we're going to target people who are in Seattle. You can make sure they have behaviors that they're frequent travelers. You can specify that they need to be interested in Victoria, British Columbia. We'll also make it even narrower and say that, okay, they must be frequent international travelers, as best Facebook can determine, which means that they'll have a passport and can actually travel here. Also, they have to be interested in food and wine. And you could take it even further than that, but just having a look at the numbers that pan out from that, you can see, oh, well, heck, there's actually 37,000 people in Seattle that meet all those criteria. So if you were looking to do that sort of promotion, that would be just an excellent target. And also 37,000 people, it's a nice sized audience, but it's not going to cost more than a couple $100 to advertise to them. I mean, the exact budget, of course, changes campaign to campaign based on who the audience is and how competitive it is for that audience. And also, let me tell you, don't try and advertise on Facebook between November and Christmas, because it gets ridiculously expensive with the run up to Christmas when every retailer on the planet is on there. But yeah, so very super practical, super targeted, very sort of straightforward way of sort of jumping into it. And this is something that is totally viable for companies operations to do internally as well. You'll need to do a bit of research and learn about it, but you don't need an agency to set up this sort of promotion. Although I'd certainly love to help you if you did. The one thing I would suggest, though, is absolutely make sure to use those UTM links that I talked about. And actually, Facebook has another convention for entering those. But one way or another, make sure you have those trackable UTM links in place for that. It makes all the difference. Can tell you if it worked or not. Moving to another example, which I really like. This is some really cool targeting, and I had mentioned somewhere in our materials that most people don't even know this exists, and most people don't know this exists. But if you look down below, you can see that when you pick the location, so you pick a target location, in this case, Victoria, British Columbia, you can select that you only want to target people who are traveling in this location. So these are people who don't live here, but are currently visiting. And if you look in the example, I did an example thinking, and in this case, actually, sorry, pardon me, that's Seattle in this case that we've got selected. And if you were an attraction in Seattle that wanted to appeal to families, here's your perfect target. Here's basically targeting people who are 25 to 55, who are traveling in Seattle right now, who are parents. And again, 8,000 people is not a huge target. It's going to cost, well, I mean, it's a meaningful target in terms of reaching that number of people, but it's not huge in terms of expense. So it's actually going to cost you very little to reach those people. Conversely, a Victoria example, a company like Wild Play, which is an adventure, outdoors adventure experience. We've done a bunch of work with them over the years, and in their case, they could target, in their case, they would probably target people visiting Victoria also who were parents, although they would probably do only parents of kids over a certain age, probably 10 and up. And that's a criteria that you can set in there as well. So again, if done well, this can be ridiculously effective. And again, the great thing about it is you're not investing thousands of dollars. You could literally go and try this experiment tomorrow with a budget of $100 and see if it worked, see if there was a big enough audience, and see what the response was. Again, definitely worth figuring out that how to use those UTM links that I mentioned. I did share a link to the Google UTM Builder in there, and also for anybody that's interested, we'd be happy to share a little builder spreadsheet with you as well. So you can just hit me up after the event, should you want that. So Facebook and Instagram retargeting is also super powerful. So that it allows you to advertise to recent visitors to your website. It can be powerful during the research stage and can also just really shine during that visit stage. Bit of a caveat, which is if you're in a large enough market, because there are typically some minimum audience sizes you need. But again, it doesn't cost anything to try out beyond the time it takes to set up an ad. So, and I'd be kind of thinking about somebody in town for a weekend, they just visited your website, and then boom, your ad is following them around all through Facebook or Instagram as they're browsing and thinking about what they're going to do tomorrow. So a great opportunity. Again, it doesn't work for everybody, but it absolutely does work for a lot of companies, and just doesn't cost much to test. I'll have to explain this, but what you typically want to do is go short and narrow with your retargeting, and then expand from there as your results dictate. And basically what I mean by that is, first off, in terms of being narrow, you want to possibly add some targeting criteria. So if there's a big audience, you might add, for instance, in that parents example, if it's a kid-oriented, child-oriented attraction, you could, in theory, just advertise so that you're targeting only parents in terms of the narrowness. And where I mean short is basically within any retargeting setup, you can dictate how long a window you want to have your ads appear after somebody has visited your website. So in that case, you can have a slightly longer window if somebody's doing, if somebody's not in your market, but doing research about your market. So in the example, let's just pick Seattle for that example. If you have an operation in Seattle, you'd pick a longer retargeting window for people who are visiting your site from outside of Seattle. And then in the destination, I mean, the longest people are staying is probably typically about a week. So you might actually set only a 5-day window where your ads will only show up for 5 days after somebody has visited the site. Because of course you don't want to pay for them if somebody's gone home. Just carrying along. So Google Display Network, I felt like that skipped for a sec, but we're all good. So Google Display Network is the world's largest display advertising network. And apparently what it is virtually any website, any big website, sorry, I just need a sip for my throat. Any big publisher website. So in this example, there's a couple screenshots. There's the Condé Nast Traveler site, and also our local newspaper, the Victoria Times Colonist. They would love to sell their ads directly at full price to their advertisers. That basically never happens anymore in this day and age. So most sites like the Times Colonist or the Condé Nast Traveler will have like 90% of their inventory that needs to get sold somehow. So what they do is put their inventory out onto advertising networks. And these networks are basically intermediaries that gather up lots of sites where their ads are allowed to appear and then sell that inventory to advertisers like you and me. So where Google Display Network comes in is it's, and this is totally distinct from Google Search, by the way, but where Google Display Network comes in is that you can actually put your banners on these websites. So in this, and a funny example, we were just talking about retargeting a moment ago, and this example there are 5 ads showing between these three screenshots. 3 of the 5 are remarketing ads. So there's this one up top, this Duda one was a tech company. I was visiting their site. There's a case studies one from another tech company whose site I was visiting. There is a Zoom 360-degree meeting solution for mixing virtual and in-person meetings that I was looking at the other day. And then there's this Polestar auto ad. I haven't been to their website, so but I have been reading out of curiosity about electric vehicles. So this will be an interest-based ad that's been targeted at me. And then I hadn't been to Expedia recently when I was looking at this site, but have been looking at a bunch of travel stuff. So Expedia will be targeting me because of my travel intent. So that's kind of what the display network is. And it's actually pretty straightforward to get your ads placed in these places. So you can use static banners, which are basically just the traditional JPEG banner ad. You can use HTML5 ads, which the Expedia example is actually a good example of that because it actually is animated and the screen changes. And you can also do responsive display ads, which are the Google ads that are basically you put in a whole bunch of headlines, a whole bunch of images, and then Google automatically fits them to fit whatever space is available and optimizes them for performance. And examples of those are the case studies that do to add up here, and then the Polestar ad. Those are kind of funny examples because they're certainly not the most beautiful ads in the world, but having worked with hundreds of companies right now at this point, sadly from a branding perspective, the responsive ads generally always perform better. Something cool too now, you can put short videos in the responsive ads as well. So this display network, and a lot of people don't know a lot about this display network, but mostly what people do know about it is it's considered low quality. And the reality is that it is a low quality network without insightful targeting and then big time customization of the placements. And in short, what Google does is essentially, if you don't control it, puts these ads out everywhere, including on all kinds of apps and games, many of which are made by sort of offshore companies that only make them with the intent of getting revenue from ad clicks. So if you've ever been in an app and you mistakenly clicked on an ad and you went back to the app and sort of grumbling because it's almost impossible to scroll through it without clicking on an ad, that was probably actually intentional by the creator of that app to get more ad revenue. So obviously those kind of clicks are worthless. Fortunately, there are ways of blocking all the apps and games and low quality websites out there. So that's where used skillfully, the display network can be super effective, occasionally even more effective than search, which is really impressive. The display network's quite low cost, but the one thing I would say is that unlike the Facebook where kind of DIY is just fine. If you have a good idea, you can execute on it in Facebook. With Google Display, if you want to do it yourself, you will need to do sort of a bunch more research and learning to be able to get around those challenges that I mentioned. Kind of a funny thing too, because actually I've worked with Google and we've been premier partners with them for like 5 years now or something. And I generally think that they're a fairly ethical company, but how they manage the display network just boggles my mind. It's not really good for anybody in some cases. So the display targeting, how the targeting works on the display network is pretty straightforward. One thing I don't mention in here is you can do if you want, you can pick just a limited number of websites for your ads to appear on and just have your ads appear to anybody who visits those websites. That's typically not the most powerful way of targeting. You can do the remarketing, which is actually the exact same as retargeting, except Google calls it remarketing, Facebook calls it retargeting. No idea why, but so that's one targeting option. Something that's really powerful when they work, and again, they don't always work, but this is where some cost-effective experiments can help you find out, is that Google automatically can create audiences for the site that you want to advertise for your property. So in this case, there are audiences available in Google of beach-bound travelers, business travelers, family vacationers, luxury travelers, water sport enthusiasts, all these different targets. So you're actually able to target those right through the audiences. You can also pick your own topics. You can pick your own keywords that people have used in search recently. Google keeps something up to, it's insane, but it's something like 90 million potential data points anytime it shows an ad. Obviously, it doesn't consider all those data points, but that's the number of data points that it has out there. Google has something like 6 or 7 properties now that have over 1 billion users on them. And Google has done a fairly masterful job of tracking people fairly anonymously across all those networks. So it's escaped some of the trap that Facebook has had around privacy, because it technically doesn't track who someone is. It tracks what their behaviors are, and it tracks what those behaviors are across these multiple platforms. So if you can crack the targeting and leverage Google's intelligence, some really huge opportunities there. Typically, the best results come from layering criteria. So you can layer one criteria over another and make sure that people meet multiple targets. This is a real common topic that we get on is basically shrinking your target until you get just the most sort of desirable people within the target. Way better than advertising to a broad target. In terms of that thing, targeting websites that your target has visited, or rather targeting people who have visited specific websites. Great example would be if you had, I don't know, a tourism business in Niagara Falls, you could target all the people, say, on the Eastern Seaboard, US and Canada. You could target all the people in that area who have been to the Niagara Falls Tourism Board website. And basically those people are anonymous, but your ads will start to appear to folks that have been to that website recently. So definitely some great opportunities there. Like I said, I don't want to oversell it, because you're not always going to have success with it. But again, with the minimal cost of the display network, it's just not at all an issue to experiment with that sort of stuff. With the geographic targeting, as I was mentioning, Google tends to be a bit more anonymous, so it doesn't specifically know where people live necessarily, so it doesn't have that visitors to targeting. But what you can do is accurately geo-target and then combine interests on top of those targets. So a couple examples here, like for Niagara Falls, here's an example of picking the postal code on the zip code on the US side of the falls. You can target, and combining with some interests, like say the family travelers example, you can do more or less the same thing as we discussed in Facebook. You can target by postal code, you can drop a pin and target a radius around it. You can do cities, states, you can do countries. Couple fun examples that we've done is actually at one point in the Caribbean, we set an ad schedule to follow the locations and port visits of different cruise ships. So we're actually targeting the area around the cruise ship docks in the evenings when the cruise ships were in port, and people would be online for attractions in those areas. That's one kind of fun, creative example. Another one that I really was pleased with, we had somebody who was attending and exhibiting at an educational conference in Vancouver, and they were kind of late to doing any promotion and wanted to boost visits to their booth. So we actually just did a radius target for display network targeting, and targeted everybody in that whole area, that kilometer area around the convention center. And in that case, actually, they got booth visits from folks that had seen their banner on the Google Display Network, which is quite cost effective. We basically flooded it, put in a compelling call to action to visit along with their booth number. And yeah, so there's tons of creative opportunities out there. I've got to hurry up. I'm not leaving a ton of time for questions, although I can stay. If anybody has specific questions, I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer, or even looking at case studies or individual examples. So search advertising, kind of the last thing that we're covering. The search advertising is ridiculously powerful if you do it well. I don't, Google's, of course, the huge player. If you're in a market, well, I kind of don't want to say, but if you're in a market that attracts seniors, the demographics are such that there are still a lot of seniors on Microsoft browsers. So that's using the Microsoft search engine quite often. So there's some value in trying the Microsoft search engine as well. Although I would usually look to get some successful strategies going on Google first, and then kind of port them over to Microsoft. With the search advertising, intent is the single biggest factor. So the more specific someone's search is, the better. So, I mean, I've seen people bidding on crazy things like, in living here in Victoria, British Columbia, I've seen hotels bidding on like Victoria, BC as a keyword. It's like, oh my gosh, there are so many reasons people would be researching the city that don't involve a visit, that's just crazy. I mean, there's so many searches that the cost per click isn't expensive, but the likelihood of somebody converting and booking is so ridiculously low. On the flip side, if somebody's booking for like Victoria Waterfront Hotel, that suggests that they are definitely thinking about coming here, and it matters to them to be on the waterfront. So if you had a waterfront hotel, bidding on that kind of keyword is going to be just way more effective. Or if somebody's searching for a, Victoria, BC hotel and spa, again, just the level of detail and the interest suggests that they are definitely thinking about visiting. And if you happen to have a hotel with a spa, that would be an excellent keyword to bid on. And really for small operators, costs can be really prohibitive if you don't sort of niche down at the start of your ads efforts. Because the bigger advertisers have more practice at it. They are converting at a higher rate, which means that their cost per acquisition is way lower, so they can spend way more. So essentially they're outspending you, they're better at it, and they're getting cheaper prices. So going head to head is just not a great idea. What you absolutely want to do is figure out where you differ from them, what the features are that somebody might be searching for, and then focusing on those things, again, in the areas that you can win in. Just going through a fun exercise with a client on that whole thing, and essentially figuring out like, okay, just how niche do we have to get to a point where nobody else is meaningfully bidding on those terms. Of course, that's a tough way to generate quick scale or to grow it really quickly. But I mean, as a business owner myself, when you're when you're paying for the advertising yourself, versus a large corporate operation that can just, invest $50,000 this quarter in hopes that they'll get it better set up for next quarter. Like, you just can't compete with that. You absolutely need to preserve your money and be very careful with your budget. So niching down is one somewhat labor intensive way to approach it, but definitely effective in terms of keeping hard costs down. Google Hotel Ads, which over on the right in the screenshot there, you can see those little squares down by the Google Maps. Those are Google Hotel Ads. They can also be effective, and they were a pet peeve of mine because as recently as last year, which is the last time I looked closely at them, only select companies were able to offer them. You had to go through an intermediary. It is now actually possible to set those up directly. A little technically challenging from what I can see, and this is new, so we haven't actually done it yet, but are absolutely going to be recruiting some folks to try that with. But those ads are very effective, and particularly, and again, looking at visiting a specific spot, deciding you want to stay downtown, looking at the map on what's going on downtown, and having those prices and ads pop up, super effective. And also, again, this is something that since the start of the pandemic, Google has made appearing in these feeds free at some points. So in general, if you're in a really competitive environment, you're probably not going to get much free traffic, but there is a possibility that your property will show up for free through those Google Hotel Ads. Now, typically for clients that are doing it more on the shopping than the hotels, because again, we haven't been doing the hotels, but in the shopping ads, it's the same thing. And what we've seen is kind of less than 10% of the traffic and visibility is of the free type, but nonetheless, we've had clients that have done thousands of dollars in revenue through the free ones, so definitely worth signing up for. And then the other little screenshot down there is just an example from actually a regional campaign last summer when things were just opening up again. And that example, we can see where $4,400 in ad spend drove $44,000 in actual bookings, which is, yeah, really a big example in how the sort of narrow, sort of niche search can work for you. Sadly, again, the Google search ads are not particularly DIY friendly. If it's going to be a really important part of your business, I would absolutely encourage you, if you're interested in that sort of thing, to take some courses and get good at it. But there is an ugly learning curve, again, unlike the social ads, but definitely reward in there. So with that said, time for my quick shameless plug. We have two business divisions. One is Plus ROI, online marketing. The ROI stands for return on investment, and that's really what we focus on. And we're basically an agency focused on helping acquire customers and drive revenue. We focus on the return on investment side. We're not a brand agency. We love and respect brand agencies that do a great job around the awareness and the look and feel. We basically take your brand and run with it and do what we can to leverage the most revenue and bookings or whatever strategic activities you want your customers to take. We work with a lot of sort of small to medium-sized businesses. Typically, there might be a single manager with just one staff person, typically without a team. And that's where we can fill in and actually be that team, or just fill in where there's gaps, which are typically in those more technical marketing areas that are quite challenged. And then Jumpstart Web is our basically streamlined advertising division, and in short, offers the best value advertising services you're going to find for the industries that we support. And we do certain industries, fortunately tourism being one of them, but essentially we look at industry strategies in Jumpstart and do really effective advertising around it. Not quite the same one-on-one custom experience, but in terms of for smaller operators, it's fantastic value. So that again is the end of my shameless plug. I'll just share, love answering questions, always happy to have a quick conversation. Feel free to email me, especially if you want that UTM spreadsheet, and I'm really easy to find on LinkedIn, so happy to connect on there as well. And with that said, let's just address a couple of the questions that have come up. And also I want to thank everybody for taking the time. And at this point, certainly if you have to leave, feel free. We will share the video transcript and some slides afterwards. But otherwise, why don't I'll start by answering, we've got an anonymous question. I'll start by answering that. And anybody else, just please fire questions into the Q&A or the chat window. And the first question was about whether you can set up attribution in e-commerce analysis with the contest, or if the best metric is the increase in the database. And I would say, yeah, absolutely. The best metric typically is the increase in the database for the sort of contests that we do, just simply because contests don't usually drive immediate sales. So it is kind of a multi-step strategy of wanting to build your email database and then sort of taking advantage of that over time. Had a couple other things come up. Another person asked about the difference between programmatic advertising versus Google Display. And this is kind of funny because actually this is kind of a pet peeve of mine. Programmatic advertising is what everybody's talking about right now. There are a ton of strengths for it. Essentially, what it is, it's working with exchanges that have access to ad networks outside of the display network and the display network. And so whereas the display network reaches about 70% of the publisher sites on the website, you can get closer to about 95% of the publisher websites on the web, sort of with the programmatic. Sorry, I had a quick brain freeze there for a sec. However, so programmatic is fantastic for national chains that want efficient media buys across multiple markets. And part of the reason for that too is that in programmatic, there's often third-party data layered into that, which third-party data sounds like a fairly benign topic. But what that is basically all the sites that are scraping your information and different properties that have stuff buried in their privacy agreements and store information about you. They actually sell that information to different networks to layer on top of the advertising and geographic targeting. So this work gets quite interesting. So in theory, that can work really well in some cases. However, we've competed with lots of programmatic offerings over the year. We don't offer it. I have overseen a number of campaigns, but in general, with the size of companies that we work with, we've seen any sort of niche property, small to medium-sized business, advertising within budgets that are kind of less than $10,000 to $20,000 a month. We're confident that we're basically always able to leverage the display network to get better results, and have measured this by taking time to layer and experiment with those audiences that we looked at and topics and keywords. So essentially programmatic and display both have their strengths and weaknesses, but for a smaller operation, I would absolutely 100% lean towards display, with the big caveat that if you can get some support to weed out the garbage. And we've got, actually, Natasha has asked a question. Hey, Natasha, it's been a few years. We're a micro hotel in Nashville, Tennessee. Based on your advice about social media, are you suggesting it's best to advertise accommodations on Google and use social media for more activity-based advertising, like in our food and beverage outlets? In short, yes. Of course, everybody's a little bit different. So what I would suggest is that social media advertising is probably still some great opportunities for the sort of local and regional, sort of the driving vacations and short hops. There's definitely going to be opportunities there. But for folks, if you're marketing to New York City, for example, absolutely the Google would be the first way to go for that for a majority of people. And then absolutely the heavy social presence for food and beverage while people are in the city. There are some really creative things that you could do that, again, that thing that we looked at under the dash about marketing to people who are visiting in your city, not a lot of places doing that. So some really good opportunities if you can find some narrow targets, and if competition hasn't made the cost per click rise too high. There was one person that asked about whether isn't SEO better than search advertising, to which I would kind of answer yes, but there's the big if you can pull it off. And again, what I mean by that is first off, you need to be able to commit to doing it to a level that will do better than your competition. So that's kind of the first caveat. The other thing is, if we're sitting here in July 2021, things have opened back up again. If we want more visitors and more traffic in August, SEO isn't an option. In short, SEO work that you're doing now probably won't benefit you until 2022 at the earliest. There's exceptions to that, but that would be pretty typical. So essentially, you could argue that it's better, but if you want traffic in August, advertising is more or less the only way of doing that, or promotions. With that said, I think we've covered pretty much everything. Did anybody else have any last questions before we wrap it up? All right. Well, with that said, thanks very much, everybody. We'll get the slides together and get the video transcript, and we should share that by the end of next week. So thanks again, and everybody have a great weekend.